Having an understanding of how the psyche develops is obviously, you would think, would be important for psychologists, for example. And then this idea of relational dynamics that are associated with each level, right? The relational dynamics are different at different levels of development. So obviously you relate to a 3-year-old different than you relate to a 10-year-old, different than you relate to a 20-year-old. To make it even more complicated, no matter how old you are, at certain times you're being a 3-year-old, at certain times you're being a 10-year-old. And in those moments, there's times when you need to be related to as such, right? And then, of course, it's more complicated than that because it's like sometimes the 3-year-old needs to relate to another 3-year-old.
Right.
Sometimes the 3-year-old needs an adult. So it's just this huge...
I don't need the same reaction to my 3-year-old self when I'm being that 3-year-old self.
Usually not.
That's what got me here.
Yeah, right. Unless you're just being playful. But yeah, it's typically not therapeutic. But so it's obviously extremely complex, but we all try to navigate that, and I'm just suggesting that having certain words on it and understanding certain categories can help one be better at relating, whether it's in a therapeutic context or not. And for me, the more I got to where I was aware of subtle energy, I mean that changed everything, because these concepts about individuation and about projection or narcissism or codependence, I started to see what the energetic correlate of that was. And so that was just huge as far as being able to start having a map in my head of, okay, what's going on right now and why and what kind of effect does this have?
The dynamic you're talking about where like we enter like a 3-year-old state, mm-hmm. and someone reacts to it because they're expecting like our mature adult self to show up in the moment, and for whatever reason it doesn't. Mm-hmm. Like that dynamic is like going on all the time.
Yeah. How
do you navigate that like in session? Maybe it's obvious for some people, but that seems like a good insight to me. Like what do you do when you run into that?
If I run into a client dropping into a 3-year-old?
Yeah.
Yeah, it varies because there's a schema there that's important as far as, like I've said before, coaching is different than counseling is different than psychotherapy. And one of the ways that they're different is that, the idea is that, okay, when coaching isn't working, it's like, do they need counseling? If counseling isn't enough, okay, do we have to dive deeper into psychotherapy? And so within psychotherapy, the idea is, okay, let me just think of an example. It's like if you have this negative view of yourself, right? You think you're a bad person, let's say. If I just said, no, actually, you're a good person, it's like, okay, great, problem fixed, right? And it's like, well, that wasn't a very deep issue. But
as soon as I disagree with you about something, then that goes out the window.
Yeah, right.
If my understanding of how good I am is dependent on you telling me it goes away as soon as I see you as untrustworthy.
Yeah, that's totally something that can happen.
Right. I was just thinking, like, if for some reason that solved the issue of my self-worth, you telling me that I'm good, that might be what's going on.
Right. Yeah. And in a similar way, if the person you have a crush on seems to also have a crush on you, then you think you're the shit. But if the next day or the next year they have a crush on someone else and not you, suddenly you're no longer the shit. Now you're just shit.
Right.
And it's amazing how powerful that can be, obviously. I mean, it can literally take us to just blissful heights or just hellish lows. In therapy, it's like one of the just kind of general categorizations would be, okay, there's psychoed, which means you just explain to the client what's going on, and then they're able to understand the concept and then start trying to work with it themselves, right? But often the problem's deeper than that, and so you got to do more of this. Instead of just interpretation, it's that you have to start doing some kind of deconstruction or some kind of transferential work where you start to interact with the pattern pattern meaning the issue, the problem. And so there's these degrees as to which the client knows what's happening or knows what they're doing. And there's all this variance, right? Because sometimes a person can know that, all right, I'm being irrational. I'm regressing down into this place, but they're aware of it. And it's like they're able to just let themselves do it because they know they're in a therapy session. Or we all do it where with certain people, we know we can allow ourselves to be less organized and say a bunch of stuff that we wouldn't necessarily say to other people. But so what I'm trying to get at is this idea of unconscious motivation, right, is what it comes back to. That's where psychotherapy started, was that there's unconscious motivation. And so we're experiencing problems in life due to unconscious factors. And making those conscious to some degree was the fix, right? The various schools of psychotherapy are aimed at these different levels of a person's psyche. So relational transferential psychotherapy, a lot of the actual change, right, or if you say the agent of change, it's happening unconsciously, where neither therapist nor client necessarily know what the hell is going on, or are tracking it consciously in a way that is accurate or is in control. It's kind of like saying, you know how there's always these levels of whatever you want to call it, levels of understanding. It's like, do I know how to operate this MacBook that's sitting in front of me? And it's like, well, I could say, yes, I know. I know how to.
You're a master.
Yeah. It's like I can open the thing up and I can turn it on and I can send some emails and write some documents and surf the internet, and that's about it, right? I certainly don't know how to build a computer, and if I start diving deeper in, it's like, God forbid I open up the Finder, right? It's like, I'm starting to get dangerous because I don't really know what I'm doing in there, and if I find myself, if I start diving too deep into the programming of this computer, it's not going to be good, right? There's those files. I think we've all had that experience. You open up a certain file and it's like, oh God, I need to get out of this file before I really mess this computer up. If you kind of make an analogy that the human psyche is like that, right? That we have these levels of, obviously I've been using the word structures that are in there that are affecting how we operate. And so in a relationship with another person, for example, the more you regress, the more intimacy there is, the more...
You've mentioned that before. I think it's a good point to make, just to say that
You mean Freud's thing that as trust and intimacy increase, regression increases. And so it'd be analogous to you start going deeper into the computer, back towards some kind of origin. And what happens in that interaction between, let's say, you and your partner or you and your therapist or whatever, it starts having more and more power to create change in the overall system. And that's this idea of structural change, right?
Right.
But what I'm getting at right now is, unlike being a computer technician who knows what they're doing when they dive into the deep underbelly of the computer, therapists just have these vague ideas about how it works when you dive deep into the underbelly of the human unconscious. But going down in there is the idea, as far as if you're going to get real deep structural change. And so with certain maladies, a therapist just explaining to the client that seems like a false belief, or that seems like that's just from your childhood, or that's trauma, or that's a wound, or that's just a defense. It's like, okay, great, that only goes so far. How do you get change in it? It's like, well, one of the ideas is, well, let's work with the defense. Another idea is, let's get underneath the defense and process the feelings that are underneath that. The one you hear the most often is beneath the anger is sadness. but certainly beneath the sadness can be anger.
Be more anger, right?
Yeah. And then it's like, well, is there a wound in there? To what extent is there a wound versus just some like repressed feelings? Or even worse, is there a trauma, which means there was splitting? And there's one of the huge things in the way I work and where the dimension approach comes in is that there is energy to this. It's not all mental. It's not just, and now we uncover and you remember the trauma and now, that makes sense, and now I see what happened there. It's like, okay, that only goes so far because a person can start to have a sense or a memory, but that doesn't mean they can resolve the underlying issue or the pattern, the energetic pattern, the split in their psyche. And when you start to heal a split or when you start to uncover unconscious contents or when you start to deconstruct an ego construct or when you start to get more open and more vulnerable and more intimate, these energies show up, whether they show up in the form of emotions and feelings or whether they just show up in the form of subtle energetic vibration. And they can be too, if you make the energy like an electrical system, it's like a person's mind gets overwhelmed by the charge. I'm kind of jumping all over here, but
the other thing that with the whole regression piece, which I think is just fascinating and like I would like to just hear your thoughts on or get back to, is that, like you're saying, doing this work will often feel like regression because partly regression is definitely happening and you're becoming more aware. I think this is where the dimension approach is valuable, becoming more aware of when you're regressing.
Yeah.
So you're going to have like, observation bias, seeing times you regress, and those things have been going on all along, but now like you realize that's a dimension of your experience and not just, how everybody reacts to stubbing their toe,
Right.
Like so I think that's like a really important part of the healing process you're talking about is seeing this for yourself in addition to the work that's going on.
Yeah, there's these categories to it. Because what I was starting to talk about, but I think it's maybe needs to be put in a different topic, but it's kind of like in explaining these developmental phases and then in explaining therapeutic modes, if you will, there needs to be an understanding of how the psyche works. And one of the models I tend to use is that the ego mind is tasked with trying to process, organize, interpret all these energies, right, that come into it in the same way that your nervous system is delivering all this sensory information up to your brain, and then your brain's got to process enormous amounts of information and then make decisions constantly. And most of this is unconscious. And I mean, we're not even ego aware of most of that, right? We're just constantly, our body's doing stuff and we're making adjustments on all these levels, even just maintaining your balance, right? It's like you're usually not thinking about maintaining your balance unless you happen to be walking on slippery ice or something, and then now you're consciously registering that.
There's just this image that came to mind just real quick.
Yeah.
I like the way you're describing the loose hold on our even physical reality that our ego mind has. And it's like the idea that, like, think about like literally trying to puppeteer a person, right? Trying to like make a physical body into a marionette. And like just the logistics of that are insane.
Yeah.
Like to have something, a contraption, and to think that like somehow this construction in your mind is maintaining control over this entire physical system right. And not just reacting to it. Like, it's obvious when you think about it, but it's not how we're thinking about it. I just go back to, I like the idea that, or the way you said it, that the ego thinks it learned how to ride a bike.
Right.
And it's like, no, your body learned how to ride a bike.
Yeah.
And I like that. I really, so that's what made me think about. You tell the story for the rest. I remember when I learned how to ride a bike. It's like right. I remember my body learned how to ride a bike.
Mostly our ego mind can get in there and mess up
right
how to do it. And I'm gonna go back to golf again. But it's true of anything, right? People who play golf know this well. It's like you go out there, and when you aren't thinking about it at all, you just swing the club, and you just hit the ball perfect. And then the more you decide you're gonna pay attention, the more you're gonna try, the more you're gonna think about your form. And of course, when you hit it real good like that, you're like, okay, what did I do? What did I do that was right that time?
Yeah.
And then it's like, just forget it from there, because now your ego mind's in control. And it's just mess it up because your body knows how to do it.
Right. Let your body do it.
Yeah. And it's the same with art, right? Like, the poetry writing I do. It's like, I'm just aware when my ego mind comes in and goes, oh, okay, I see what we're doing here. And it's like, oh,
let me add some flourishes right here.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, I should just stop because, it came in and took over. And so that whole idea of a flow state, intuition, creativity, obviously in any endeavor, that ego mind control tends to
see the body as less than, almost.
Yeah.
Like subservient to, instead of like primary when it comes to a physical task. Yeah.
Yeah. Or even, as far as how you use the word body, right? If the body is like energies. And so then even this idea that writing poetry, it's like, can you let your body lead? And body meaning part of your system that's not this conceptual ego mind overlay.
That's cool.
The idea that body, we tend to use the word to just mean physical. And obviously you could talk energy body or emotional body or mental body. And now that word body is being used in a different way. This model of the mind having to deal with energies, and the idea that we start off with the mind not developed in a way that it knows how to deal with energies. And so we need other minds to relate to. And then via the relational process with these other minds and other bodies, our system develops. But then what exactly goes on in those relationships is huge as far as what kind of end result do you have. And so that's the process of relational therapy, and it's the process of human relating in general. When energies move directly from body up into mind and don't go out and bounce off an other, it's a very different process. And the general idea that you hear in structural psychotherapy is that that intrapsychic structure, which means your structures in your mind, is created via interpersonal relationships. And then you go and do interpersonal relationships via those structures. And then it's, okay, how deeply ingrained do those structures get? How permeable are they? Right? Because if you just have really fixed, set intrapsychic structure that you operate from, and now you go to be interpersonal with someone, and that person doesn't relate to you in a way that jives with your structure, then you're going to have problems. Again, I keep coming back to this, but it's not just conceptual. You can't go in and reprogram the mind just conceptually. And one way to describe why that is because the existing structures in someone's psyche are managing energies. And if you're going to change those structures, you got to do something with the energies. It's like, it's so an analogy that I'll use is the plumbing system in your house, right? It's like you have these pipes and you have these valves, and the water, there's water pressure, right? And if you get leaks in the pipes, or if you leave a faucet turned on or whatever, then stuff happens, right? And it's like there is the water pressure in the human psyche is the libido, is the id, rather. The libido is part of that. And it's like, to varying degrees, we have leaky pipes, or we have valves that are either doing their job or not. And so when you think about it that way, it's like, look, these structures in the mind are extremely important. And when you mess with them, mixing analogies here, but it's like remodeling your boat while you're at sea. You know what I mean? It's like it's a dicey endeavor, but we're all stuck in that endeavor, whether you're in therapy or not. I think to understand that someone's psychic structure, they can't just hear the truth or hear the correct way to do it and then feel different. If you've got murderous rage coming up, and then you're aware that, okay, I don't really want to murder people. This feels awful. What can I do with it? You can't just think about it differently. It's like your mind's being flooded with this energy. Or if you feel terribly sad, or if you feel terribly depressed or suicidal, and it's Freud's idea of psychic conflict is a really important idea, that our mind and its ideas about what's right and what's good and what would be best to behave and what would be best to not behave, et cetera, is in conflict with the energies that are surging in our system. And I keep saying it, but our present society has just kind of negated that and act like it's all just up in the conceptual. And here are the words you're allowed to say, and here are the bad words, and here are the jokes you can make, and here are the jokes you can't make, and here are the thoughts you can have, and here are the thoughts you can't have. And it's like, what the hell are we doing? That's like going back to the Middle Ages or something. That's not how we work. We have this unconscious, we have these bodies that are made up of incredibly intense energies that are not, as Freud put it, are not civilized. And not only, do I think that is important as far as politics, but with regard to clinical situations and working with someone, it's like it has to be kept in mind of, okay, what is going on with the energies in this person versus what's going on in the structures in their mind. And what I came to through experience was, when I plug in, so to speak, empathically, which creates a hookup, like electrically, it's like, okay, now I'm hooked up. Now my system is literally helping them manage these energies, not just metaphorically, but literally my energy body, I'm plugging it into their energy body, which is empathy. And then I'm tolerating, organizing, harnessing, et cetera, the very energies that they are in the throes of trying to wrestle with. And that's a huge, to understand that brings a lot of understanding to what can go on when you have a blow up with your partner, or when you lose your shit, or when someone else unravels you in a way that surprises you. It's like, again, we're all either plugging in empathically or not. And there's times when you should unplug so that you don't just get destabilized yourself. But when you unplug, you're leaving that person on their own.
Right.
Even if you're standing there saying no.
Dealing with the thing that you don't want to deal with either.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And a lot of times, that happens where it's like, no, I'm here. I care. I'm trying to help you. And the person's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. And, or they still feel alone, or they still don't feel heard or met. And it's like, there's often truth to that. It's like, you're not quite plugging in. To the extent that I became more conscious of, am I plugging in or am I not? And the huge effects one can have versus the other on myself and or the client. It was like, oh my God, this is what transference is, and then all this psychological literature about the different nuances of that and how it works. It's like, okay, that it all started to make way more sense to me. And I started to be able to track what's going on there. And then the insight of, okay, just empathizing doesn't necessarily, like just plugging in and empathizing only has a certain effect. It's like if you're enraged and then I plug in and, okay, now we're both enraged. It's like, okay, sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not. But generally speaking, it's like, okay, what needs to happen with the energies? Well, they need to get felt. They need to get contained, right? They need to get organized, which is what containing does. They need to get mirrored so that the conscious mind can start to see them and take ownership of them, et cetera. So that's why the phases of the dimension approach. So, but to plug in and empathize and connect and allow that sharing of the experience or one way it's put in somatic psychotherapy is that you've got one soma and two psyches, right? You're sharing a body. The more you're empathizing, the more you're in a merge, the more it's one body and then two minds trying to deal with it, right? And the energies will tend to follow the path of least resistance. So whichever person is more open to the energies running through, then they run through their mind. The one person who's more able to run anger through their mind, they go into this psychotic rage.
They get more angry.
And then it's that thing where it's like it's really the other person's anger, but it's coming through them. But then they look like the asshole or the abuser or whatever. And it's like, well, if that person pulls out, then now they can not get angry, but now the other person, it's like that doesn't fix it.
Is alone.
Right.
Yeah, right. Then you're just emotionally distant.
Right. It's in those deep, profound, energetic merges where if it goes intense enough, that's when the black nightgown effect happens. And also you could say when it gets intense enough, it shifts to imaginal. So to relate all that back to these levels of therapy and whatever, right? It's like, okay, how deep's the issue? And in this relational dynamic, if I'm going to help you resolve some really deep issue, it's like, well, then maybe at some point in this, you're going to have to really be lost in thinking I'm the devil. It's like, well, whoa, that's a dangerous, painful journey. And there's no guarantee that, that we'll get past you thinking I'm the devil. You might just end therapy before that happens or,
But then at least you know where the devil is and you can stay away.
Well, and there's something to that. That's actually a phase that happens. And it's supposed to happen, I think, to an extent with our parents. At some point, we're supposed to leave home, with the idea that, we're pretty sure that our parents are terrible and that the cause of all of our ills in life are because, we were stuck living with our parents. But now we can venture off into a life free of that awful tyranny. And then there's ideally this process where you work your way back towards realizing, okay, maybe they actually did the best they could or whatever.
Right.
But to your point there, I mean, and I know you were kind of joking, but it's a very important thing that
I wasn't joking.
We need to, we need to take the devil out of ourselves and put it in, even though the truth is it's in ourselves. There's a phase of development where we need to put it elsewhere.
Right.
And let that other thing hold that while we go on our merry way. And then to varying degrees, can we go back and revisit that? And it's a whole nother phase of development to come face to face with the devil in oneself and admit, recognize, allow that as much as you want to put it elsewhere. It's inside of you, and so those ideas of I've seen the enemy and the enemy is me, which is a terrible phase. People hit that, and while that, in therapy, I hear that, and I'm thinking, oh, that's great. That means they've
progress. That's
progress, but it's dangerous and it's awful and it feels really bad.
Well, anything you decide is you, and is all of you. So it's that same step every time. Like this thing I think is me, is both me and not me.
Yeah.
And that's the truth of it. And, I was laughing when you were talking about the externalized devil, sitting in your office every day in some people's minds. And I was laughing to myself, thinking about like former clients you have that like see you and cross the street. Like,
yeah, right. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking about. As you were like trying to bring it back around to, I am you as you are me as we are all together, like the higher truth of it. Like I was thinking about people running from you in the street. If you want to learn more about the Dimension Approach, please visit dimensionapproach.com.